So we're going to talk about the phishing threat first. Then we're going to go through some examples in healthcare just to kind of bring it home. The folks are going to talk about best practices around dealing with phishing messages, how to identify a phish, and then they're going to talk to you a little bit about the phishing assessments that we perform and how Jay has used those effectively in his organization, as I said, to raise that awareness, and then ultimately take your questions. And I encourage you to ask these two guys lots of questions, because I think you'll find that they have a lot of experience and a lot of interesting information to share with you. So let's talk about this threat in general first to get this thing started. So first of all, I think this is no surprise to anybody. You probably hear on almost a daily basis about phishing attacks and about phishing events or incidents that are occurring around just our industry, but almost every industry out there. This is something that's not just doesn't just affect healthcare. It affects literally everybody from both a personal and a professional perspective, and it's something that it's an avenue that almost everybody, regardless of who it is that's perpetrating one of these cyber crime incidents or cyber attacks, is using fairly frequently. So we've seen organized crime units use phishing as an entree to get into somebody's environment. We've seen hacktivists use it. We've seen cyber thieves use it. We've seen our cast and characters from inside our organizations actually using it both internally and externally to organizations. And then unfortunately, we've seen some of the state actors use that with some of the major breaches that we've seen around the industry. And ultimately, the motivation for these folks is the same motivation that we're seeing with respect to a lot of other types of cyber attacks, and it's to gain financial, to gain money, to get access to our intellectual property, whether it's the latest and greatest procedure that we're developing, or some medicine that we're developing, or some technique that we're using. It's for the purpose of extorting individuals. It's for the purpose of stealing either personal identification information or medical identification information that can then be sold on the black market. And at times we even see it being used for one organization to go after another organization, or to steal customers from an organization, or part of their patient database, unfortunately. We've seen it for the purpose of embarrassment and in terms of individuals, and even believe it or not, we've seen incidents of people doing things supposedly for good intentions. The phishing net is pretty wide. As you probably, again, as I said earlier, you've probably seen the surveys too. I think the latest figure I saw that just came out a week ago was actually lower even than the 1 in 392 emails identified as a phishing attack. I think it's now somewhere more around 1 in every 300. But we have phishing attacks happening every single day against just about every single organization that are out there, and they're attacking every facet of our IT environment. They're attacking users in terms of their mobile devices, in terms of social apps, in terms of websites that are out there that have been compromised. You name it. Just about every vehicle that they can figure out a way to turn into some way of utilization of these phishing attacks, they're actually using it, and it's costing everybody a ton of money, without a doubt. You know, and this is also just an evolution of what we've seen in the threat. If you go back a few years, you know, the threat began looking at parts of our network, systems on our network, etc., attacking the network itself. It then moved to attacking other weaknesses in things like applications, etc. And today we are attacking the human, and that's exactly what phishing is. It's an attack targeted on human beings for the purpose of exploiting them to gain access to some part of our network or some asset or some system, which can then give them a foothold to then use as a jumping off point to exploit the rest of the network. What's interesting this year, HIMSS, who has always put out a information security survey each year, this year they actually partnered with Chime and worked together to put out a new survey. And the survey that they put out at the beginning of 2015 was not their typical survey. This one was focused primarily on cyber security and cyber crime. And they had more than double the number of people who actually responded to this survey than had responded to any of the previous security surveys that they've performed. So the results of this were much more representative of what people are actually seeing and think is going on in the environment, according to the folks that track those kinds of things in terms of the number of people who respond. And the number one issue that everybody identified in terms of threats for the future was phishing. You still had the what I call the normal or usual cast of characters in terms of negligent insiders and advanced persistent threats and zero-day attacks, etc. But what was interesting is that phishing attacks has moved all the way to the top of the list. And the reason I think that it's moved to the top of the list is because it is happening so frequently, and it has been identified as usually the precursor attack to a lot of these other hacks that we're seeing happening in the industry, to the point that people are beginning to become increasingly more aware of it and more concerned about it. And if you'll, there we go. I have a little bit of lag, there we go. So the other thing that we're seeing with respect to exposure around these attacks is that, as I said, they're coming. The exposure is becoming much more broader, but at the same time, it's becoming very targeted. And, you know, as a kid growing up in Texas with a dad that used to like to fish, I think when they came up with this whole name nomenclature, they really got it right. Because, as you know, there's two different levels of fishing. There's general fishing, and then there's what we call spear fishing. And you know, and you used to go general fishing. That's when you went out to the lake and you basically dropped a hook just about anywhere, and you were trying to catch whatever was nibbling. But when you were spear fishing, you may have had your depth finder going. You may have had charts of what the bottom of the lake looked like. You may have had information that you gathered from the local folks with respect to what used to be there and where the farms were and that sort of thing that were now underwater. And you had special equipment and whatnot that you were using to go after a certain type of fish, whether it was a bass or a crappie or a catfish or whatever. And you were actually targeting the type of fish that you were actually trying to catch. And that's exactly what we're doing here. There are general phishing attacks that take advantage of social media, company websites, other types of avenues where they're just looking for somebody who's not paying attention, who is busy or is in a hurry or what have you, and it will click on an email and allow them to download some harmful payload. And then there are others where they're literally trying to target certain individuals, like we've seen in the last 2 years with respect to the attack against certain physician groups, where we've seen very direct phishing, spear phishing messages targeting that demographic, or where we've seen spear phishing messages that target folks in HR or payroll, again, being very specifically going after certain users with certain access to certain systems that they want to try to exploit. And last but not least, phishing elicits emotional response, and a lot of times that's what they're counting on to get the person to bite, so to speak. Some of these actually may seem humorous to some folks, but they're actually not. We have a ton of people out there who are going to dating sites and other kinds of sites to meet people, social media, etc. And not all of those sites are what they purport to be. And in some cases, sometimes the messages that you get with respect to those sites is not necessarily coming from the site that you think it is. And if you're not careful and you're not paying attention, first time you click on it, and next thing you know, you got more than you bargained for. One of the scams that's out there that I think is particularly distasteful is the funeral scam, where the phishing mail tries to elicit an emotional response from somebody who thinks that they've had either a loved one or a friend or somebody who has passed away, and they're being asked to send a message to the family or what have you. And unfortunately, they're not sending a message to the family, but they're sending a message to someone else who's playing on that emotion. The court summons always gets a lot of people's attention. You've been summoned. First thing you ought to ask yourself is, did you do anything wrong before you respond? But when you respond, you may not actually go to court. You may actually go somewhere else. Email from friends. We trust our friends. We trust the people we know. In many cases, we're far too trusting a society. Our friends would never do anything bad to us, so we get the email from the friend that says, hey, I want you to go to this site and check this out. You're really, I saw this and it's really cool. I think you'll like it. Boom, you go there, and next thing you know, you're off to the races, and it wasn't your friend that sent it to you at all. Fake social profiles. Oops, that's not me. The fake bank request, and I think everybody by now should know that anytime you get a request from any financial institution requesting you to update information, regardless of where they're at, or regardless of whether it looks like your bank or not, you should absolutely never respond to it, and you should question it, because those institutions are not going to ask you for credentials or ask you to update information in an email in an unsolicited manner. But that's what happens, and people react to that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Gord and let these guys take you through some examples and talk to you about their experiences, and enjoy the discussion, and please ask a lot of questions at the end. Clayton?
Yeah, so afternoon and morning to everyone out there. We're going to go through some recent examples in healthcare, kind of a triplet from small to large in organizations. So the first organization we have is an academic medical center. Roughly about 1.8 thousand patient information was exposed. This was done through a targeted phishing scam that just compromised the email accounts of just 3 physicians. And it, if you want another ugly metric, that's 6,000 per physician. But I mean, truthfully, a single targeted account that's been compromised could expose, at a minimum, this amount of information. Moving up a step, we have a regional health system. This targeted attack exposed 8.3 thousand patient information accounts. Several employees responded to these phishing emails, not just through clicking. I mean, through clicking, of course, you can have the introduction of malware, other compromised parts of like your local system or network. But in this targeted attack, the phishees, so to speak, actually submitted username and passwords. So with these credentials, the hackers or fishermen were actually able to access a database where this information was housed. And moving up to a larger national insurance provider, which is still unnamed, I think we all might know who this might be. 80 million people had their account information compromised. I was actually included in this myself. This is the largest breach in healthcare to date, which just goes to show that, from small to large, organizations across healthcare and other industries are vulnerable to this pernicious attack vector. So who's going to be next? I mean, the answer there, the bottom line up front is everyone's a target. I'm not sure if folks familiar, with black hats or the dark net the underground, a credit card nowadays gets you about $5 per credit card, and these normally have to be bundled in pretty large number of accounts. The technical controls and the the financial sector, that they've set up a lot of systems to prevent this fraud now. So a lot of hackers or black hats, however you want to refer to these folks, they don't want that information as much anymore, because there's just as much chance that they'll get caught with their use. Whereas like a medical record now goes for about $50 on the black market, and that's just due to the fact that they can leverage the information within those records for a multitude of fraud across different industries. So phishing, because of the low barrier of entry, there's not a lot of technical expertise that's necessary to perform this sort of attack. We're seeing phishing on the rise, throughout all industries, but especially healthcare, just due to the amount of information that's withheld within these records. So now we'll talk about some best practices. These are things that you need to discuss with your users and even yourself maybe to make sure that you're not vulnerable to this attack method. So the first things you need to do before you even open the message, because ultimately opening the message is still a dangerous event, the first thing we need to do is look at the subject line. Make sure that that subject line includes something familiar, some event or an account, or just something and expect. The first red flag should be thrown as soon as you get an email where the subject line doesn't match something that you're familiar with. I mean, just like Mac talked about earlier, a lot of phishing elicits some sort of emotive response. So a subject line that's, click here now, do this before your account's locked out, those should immediately, fire off klaxons and warnings, alarms. Next question really is to ask yourself, like, have you interacted with this entity before? Mac spoke already about how addresses can be spoofed just due to the nature of email system and how easy it is to pretend to be someone. But one more barrier before you get to the worries about spoofing is, have you dealt with this entity before? If someone's trying to alert you and try to elicit some emotional response and you've never heard of them before, then very likely this could be a phishing message. The last one is just, who is that sender? Do you recognize them at all? I mean, of course, if you don't recognize them, if you haven't interacted with them before, the idea now is, is this from some organization or some third party or someone who you would anticipate some sort of email or communication with? So after you open the message, immediately, when you open a message, there's a possibility that you might have already done something wrong. Not always. Usually that has to deal with whether or not you've set your settings to automatically allow, like images to be displayed or loaded. But if you have opened the email, the first thing you should always do is, analyze the sender information. And in this example, we see, complaint@DurdenAssociates.com is the display from address. Our service actually mimics a lot of phishing attacks, but we can change that. In this example, we've said, complaint@DurdenAssociates.com is the display from, but the actual sender is complaint@federal-notifications.net. So if those two don't match, that's an immediate red flag. You should always look at the sender information on a suspicious email. That's your first clue, I guess, to say that this could be a phishing message. And oftentimes the attackers are going to spoof both addresses, but if they don't get it right, this is an easy way to detect that. Once you've verified the sender, or you're more confident that the sender was legitimate, analyze the content. Many times these emails originate from outside the continental United States, so English is maybe a second language to them. There might be numerous grammatical syntax errors, as well as like that emotive response or that enticing, click me type message. So like in this example, we have one of the ones that Mac discussed, like a court subpoena. This user here is being given a court subpoena from this district of Vermont. It looks fairly legitimate, but that image can be pulled from the web very easily. It's available just through a Google search, and then the rest can just be made up information. In fact, this fish was used, we've seen in the wild, and every bit of the information here is false. Anything that you would actually search or look for would not come back to like a real organization. But always they're usually going to include that enticing message and like a short response time frame. They're wanting you to click right now. They don't want you to think about too much about what the message says or who it's from. You know, it's invoking some sort of fear. And with this type of entity, you know, a government entity, most folks don't think that, you know, a government entity would be spoofed. You know, nobody thinks that, you know, who would pretend to be the government? You could get in a lot of trouble for this. But really, that's not a barrier for these folks. They're already breaking the law. So they might as well spoof the government or any other, you know, authoritative resource. And then, of course, any free offers that seem too good to be true. Those are usually included in the content as well. So some additional signs. I mean, one of the things that after you've gone through the sender, after you've gone through the content, you need to, of course, attempt to verify. Like in that last example, you know, you can check the addresses, you can check the websites, you can call the phone numbers, you can search for the names. You know, given the power of the internet now, you can search any of that information and come back with instantaneous like results. So if you get a message from your bank saying, you know, there's a problem with your account, you're overdrawn by $10,000, there's no reason to click the link within that potential phish. You might as well just contact your bank, see if that's legitimate, rather than try to rely on some message that, you know, is probably dubious with intent. And always don't trust, you know, SSL protections, and they're good. They should be trusted for the most part, but they're not a very high barrier for someone who's anticipating a profit of maybe a couple of $1,000s. You know, a trusted certificate from a CA is only $100. Sometimes fishermen will actually go and purchase these to appear more legitimate. And it, just because the link says that it's HTTPS, you should of course hover over that link and ensure that that link, you know, really does direct you to an HTTPS protected page and that it matches the URL that's displayed. And if, of course, like if you've unfortunately clicked this link and it lands on some unfamiliar or even a somewhat familiar submission form, you know, just because it may have these SSL protections or may not, you should not just automatically submit credentials after being directed to a page from an email. And I'm going to turn it over to Jay on how to respond to some of these fish and how he does it at his organization.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jay Adams, Director of Information Security at Tallahassee Memorial. In our organization, we definitely disseminate out anytime there's a phishing message that comes into our organization that we get alerted to. We do an advertisement on our intranet site to alert people that this message is out there in the environment and to please delete. Definitely work with our email administrators to have them go through at the server level and delete that phishing email from everybody's mailbox. On the off chance that folks don't get that message off the intranet, we want to be sure to be proactive and get them delete that message before they have a chance to click on it. Also try to be proactive once we've alerted the phish is blacklist the sender of the domain, either by the subject or the sender's email address. And that sometimes cannot always be effective because they can obviously change the sender email address. So we try the best we can with that. Also, review any accounts that are exposed. For us, we like to check if they inadvertently do click on a message, our first tactic is actually disable the user's account. Because we want to make sure that their account, check for suspicious activity on it, and also validate, any information they may or may not have entered onto the phishing page. Once we validate it, we can save. We do force them to change their passwords on their accounts. Once again, this is definitely a protection, especially if you have somebody with an elevated privileged account. We definitely want to make sure that they are the ability for them to be compromised is definitely minimized. We always go back and look at the email filters. We work with our vendor to make sure that those things do get updated. If something does come through, we try to go back and evaluate why that happened and try to have rules put in or have them adjust filters accordingly. And we definitely use training for all the users. We make sure that the phishing training is out there and we educate. We definitely put posters up throughout our organization in various places so that people can see all the things we've talked about on how to identify a phish. It's very, very important. Like I say, we can put all the technical controls in the world in our environment, in our organization, but I can't, if the user's not educated sufficiently and they click on that phishing email, then we can very easily be compromised bypassing all of our controls. Next slide. Next, we're going to talk about how to identify a phish. This is an example of a phishing email that we use in my organization. This was sent out the second quarter of this year out to users, and typically a classic phish here. The golf tournament event is almost sold out, so it really immediately sold out catches your eye to try to elicit that emotion of, oh, I've got to do something right away. But if you notice the sender's address, that mytmh.net does not match up to our organization at all. And if you look at the URL they're trying to send it to, it has nothing to do with my organization. So there's subtle clues here within the phishing email that will tell you that, hey, this is probably not a legitimate email. When this went out, actually several users forwarded it to my information security team to say, hey, does this look legitimate or not? And you know, obviously they caught it, they didn't click it, didn't fall for the message. So these are, again, just subtle clues you can find in the messages, but they can be quite effective at the same time.
And this is a riff on a really like a classic phishing message. You know, your account is now full. We have to migrate you to some newer version. I mean, this one's really ugly though. I mean, we see some repetition there. We see some all caps as well as like a Russian link. And then they don't even get the name of Outlook, right? I mean, it's Outlook, and there's a 2015 version apparently that no one's heard of. The very first thing though that should mark anybody is the sender's address. You know, mail.secure-mail-changes.net. You know, no organization is going to adopt some third party to conduct this sort of this routine exercise. And then you see the hover link here, which is another important factor that I think we discussed earlier. So you should be training your users that, you know, these destination URLs don't always match the one that's presented within the phish. So here, you know, it says that it's going to this Russian site when actually it's going to the secure-mail-changes.net domain. So, you know, teach them about the sender's address like we discussed. Teach them about hovering over the links. As well as like there's other clues like we discussed, like there's that repetition, but more importantly there's no 2015 version of Outlook. So they should notice things like this within the content of the message.
This one here is another one from my organization we used to put out across the organization. This one, complaint notification, the attention grabber. You know, the headlines draws your eye right to it, so you automatically may not notice that the complaint@DurdenAssociates.com address has nothing to do with your organization. The hyperlinks within the compliant reference number, and also any of the links at the bottom there, and clicking on that PDF file. There again, just subtle clues that this message is fraudulent, but there again, they're trying to elicit that automatic response of, oh, this looks important, I need to do something immediately. Got to train your users on what to look for in that. But this phish was semi-successful in my organization. But there again, it's these same examples of messages and just the subtle clues are repeated over that you can definitely tell what's good and what's bad.
In this example, this is a little bit more targeted. Here, once again, though, we have the sender's address not matching the actual sender address. This one was targeted against a Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliate. And then here we have, you know, Blue Cross Santa Group is sending out some gift cards around holiday time. You know, so anybody wants $100, all you have to do is click this link. That's your enticing offer. All these links lead to the same place. I mean, we see the hover link here is, of course, taking them to federalnotifications.net, which isn't even a domain that really fits the context or the pretext, really, for this type of phish. But, you know, it's got some graphics. It included actually the, you know, the graphic for this organization. So, you know, users were pretty well enticed at that holiday season. Everybody knows that, you know, $100 extra when it comes to buying gifts would come in handy. So this was actually a pretty successful phish, although it was simple to detect. This next example is another one of the very most common, I would say, phish that we have out there. Sender addressing, again, is completely wrong. We have notifications at password-changes.org when the same federal-notifications.net domain is actually used. Users should have, of course, been alerted to that immediately, but then we see the hover link one more time pointing to a different addressing. And this one's telling the users that, you know, someone else attempted to access your account. You know, that's the enticement, that's the fear. You know, you want to check to see who it was, or, you know, what was the context in which they tried to take control of your account. And then one of the last examples here to like show one of the more advanced phishing methods is there's this broken pixel there, that broken image attachment at the bottom. That's usually, I mean, it's something that we use in our service. It's a 1-by-1 tracking pixel. And fishermen will generally employ something like that in the beginning phases of their attacks just to make sure that they're entering through the perimeter. You may not click the link, but just by opening this and displaying the images, you're giving the fisherman some feedback to know that you're receiving it in your inbox. You're at least examining the fish. So if he's a little bit more persistent, he or she is a little bit more persistent, this would be an indicator that he should keep targeting. So now we'll talk about like how our phishing assessments are conducted here at Synergistic. So some of the metrics, and these are not indicative of Jay's organization. This is a company-wide across all of our clients from just a few months ago. We're seeing that the greatest hurdle for our fishermen is to get the email or fish opened. We see that generally about a third of the emails are open though. The issue though is out of that third, nearly 3/4 of those are engaging the links. Engaging those links that really puts them at risk for introduction of malware within the network or within their local systems. And then really surprising and frightening is out of that 3/4 that click those links, if there's a submission form on the back end, nearly half of them will submit some form of credentials. And many times they'll submit multiple credentials. Every application maybe they use, their email account, they'll use anything just, especially if we use a submission form that just tells them every time there's an error or an incorrect password, users will just continually hand over credentials. So that's, what we usually say is that's swimming into the net all the way. And that's really what puts a lot of this information at risk, because with those credentials, a fisherman or a hacker or attacker can use those to access systems that have EPHI, PII, important financial data, maybe some of the other things that Mac talked about earlier, like intellectual property. So how do we conduct these campaigns? More than anything, we tailor everything to campaign goals. At the very beginning, we'll conduct like an initial assessment. We'll find out what kind of phishing threats have you seen in the past. What desires do you have for the campaign overall? Some more operational, strategic goals. We want to make sure that throughout the campaigns, which are generally conducted on a quarterly basis, we want to make sure that these campaigns fit the model of what you're looking for. I mean, generally we choose like a campaign in the beginning to sort of baseline the users, where there's not a lot of feedback, not a lot of training. If anything, it's to protect the operational security of the assessment. But through that, we can kind of gauge and metric what the user's response is, like generally, and then afterwards we'll produce campaigns that have more targeted training, more awareness driven, and then we'll increase the credibility of those messages over time with training, so that the users become more and more familiar with what a phishing message looks like and how to deal with it. And then finally, we'll usually do like a baseline assessment once more to see what effect the training has had on that initial assessment, and whether or not users are participating in these types of these emails more or less. The next is the customized content. Our assessments can customize nearly any aspect of the phish, as well as the training on the back end. We work collaboratively with your organization to make sure that the phish looks the way you want, the training looks the way you want. The whole experience for the user on the back end is really under our control, but more importantly yours. And then we have like flexible deployment strategy. We can deploy through our servers. We can use your mail servers. We can do this day or night, rain, sleet, snow. We can run the campaign as long as you want, as short as you want. We can shut it down early. We can shut it down late. Generally try to create a scientific approach. But we can also even just test your technical controls. If you're not interested in testing your users yet, you just want to see whether or not we can float messages through your perimeter, we can test that as well. The variable end user experience I've sort of already hit on once, but ultimately on the back end, we can create training events associated with the clicking of the link. We can create training events associated with the activity for like a submission form. And then on that back end, we can give you, multi-page training and awareness. We can give single page. It can be simple. It can be complex. We can include, JavaScript alert boxes or not. All of that back-end experience, just as well as the content, that's all fully customizable. And then, we really can show the trends. We can show the progress over time. I think that's probably one of the better things that we can do is we can, through using like more of a scientific approach and leaving these campaigns active, throughout a year, like at the same amount of time with, graduated credibility, we can show that how your users are responding, appropriately. Jay will be able to talk later on about this, but, we've been able to show through many clients that, users become more and more aware of our fish, but not only our fish, but real fish out in the wild. And then really the best selling point I can say for our service versus all others that I've worked with, eavesdropped on, whatever, is our reporting. The reporting for other phishing services is generally, it's raw reports. It's 100,000 line XMLs. It's these complex to not complex CSV type spreadsheets. All of this data, though, has to be parsed by your organizations. You have to have some analyst on the back end, digging through the results and trying to determine, who the users are, what their actions were, and what the overall issues were. With our reports, and this is an example of just the trending part, but we examine the users, who did click, the users who, or actually I take that back. We can examine the users who opened the message. We can examine the users who clicked the message. We can examine the users who submitted information. And with that information also, we can show you across campaigns, what are your, what we call hooked users? Like what are the users who are just continually responding to these patterns or with these patterns of behavior, as well as we can show which ones are compromising multiple devices. Because one of the things we also report on is, what type of system it was, whether it's a workstation, whether it's a tablet, whether it's a mobile device. We can tell you what type of device it was, what operating system it was, as well as like what browser was used to interface with these fish. And with all of that reporting, I mean, like I said, the biggest issue is the trending. So this isn't Jay's organization. This is actually another, to be unnamed. But you can see that, the first fish was pretty easy to detect. We wanted to kind of baseline just what was the general assessment that what would the general reaction to your users be to a phishing attack, and then we ramped up pretty hard the credibility of those fish, and then throughout time we can show that your users are being educated, because with other training methods, I mean, a lot of folks rely on like a yearly security awareness training, and that is helpful, and we still of course suggest that folks conduct that, but there's a lot of people that don't pay attention to that. There's a lot of folks who maybe it goes over their head. But with an assessment like this, I mean, to use a term, I mean, we can spank the puppy when they wet the rug versus, trying to catch them later on down the road. And we can give you metrics for all of that in order to, to assess like internal methods for talking to them and giving them like the information that's needed to mitigate this pernicious threat. And now I'll turn it back over to Jay.
Yeah, we started our phishing campaign back in early 2014 with Clayton, and we've had some pretty good success with it. And there was a little apprehension at first from our operational side of our operational team. They were worried about, if we disseminated a phish out to the organization, getting a lot of calls to the service desk, et cetera. But it turned out that, they didn't get a ton of calls, and our first phish was semi-successful. And then we ramped it up, and one of the big phishes we did is right around tax time. We decided to roll out a phishing email about people's W-2s, and that one we had quite a bit of success on, and we're able to see that, hey, we definitely have an issue of education and user awareness about what phishing is, that they needed to be educated, need to be trained. And this was one of the big leaps that got our executive leadership on board when they could see hard statistics behind that, hey, this is worthwhile effort, and that this needs to be an ongoing effort because the phishing is constantly changing. Now across our organization, our users have become very much proactive in any suspicious email that they may receive that looks strange. they'll forward on to our service desk or forward directly into my team to review. And it could be something as simple as an email has a strange URL to it. It may be from a sender that they were expecting it from, but the message just doesn't look quite right. And we'll definitely go in and check that for them and try to do some validations on it. Our executives recently were targeted for international wire transfers. Our CFO in particular got a message that wanted him to look. It appeared on the surface to come from our CEO, but as some of the examples we showed, if you actually would hit the reply on the email, the return to address was completely different. And it didn't have a whole lot of information into it, but they have seen and we have heard reports across at least the healthcare space that some of those have been quite successful. But our executive leadership is definitely in tune to those kind of emails, and they definitely alert us to them. And for our user populace in our organizations, we target everybody from our EVS users all the way up to our board members. We include a good cross-section of our users across the organization because everybody's at risk. And we definitely find that the training is working, and as the more and more we've gone down this road, so we're coming up almost a year, almost 2 years now, that we've been doing this, that it is definitely it's definitely helped across the board. So we're very pleased with it. But also too is the education of the users. And as I said before, sometimes your technical controls, your spam filters won't always catch fish that get through, and you have to be prepared to have those end users trained. And training is definitely the only way to really help combat this particular type of threat vector.
All right, thank you very much, Matt, Clayton, and Jay. At this time, we've got some time left over for Q&As. And again, you can use the chat function over on the control panel and send it to organizers, or you can unmute and just ask away. So I've been watching throughout the webinar, and I've got a couple already. First one is people want to know what types of phishing emails typically do you see the most success rate with? And I'll open that to any one of y'all.
Yeah, typically the most successful phish are honestly the most simple. I mean, the keep it simple, stupid doctrine works very well here. I've tried to get very complicated using a lot of images, a lot of links, you know, the unsubscribe me functions, all of that. To me, it seems that the more content that you give a user to analyze or try to determine whether it's legitimate, the greater chance you have of not convincing them. So the short, sweet, and this is why I think like the PayPal and the account, you know, the user account is exceeded max size. Those typically work best, mostly due to the fact that it's not a lot of content for the user to pass or fail on. You know, they take a look at it, they make an immediate emotive judgment, they click the link.
Yeah, in my organization, we actually ran into a phish where the phish was as simple as click on this link for a $25 Amazon gift card, or click on this link for a $50 Amazon gift card. And we actually had people click on the links. So there wasn't a whole lot of text in the phishing email. So it means Clayton's right. The simplest messages seem to be the most successful.
All right. And then the next question I have for y'all is, what kind of credentials are you seeing being submitted the most often when people fall for the phish?
I think I've seen it all. I mean, you know, Active Directory email credentials, it seems like, are, of course, the most common because so much is tied to those, which, you know, almost makes us, you know, wonder whether or not we should segment those things more rather than using some sort of single sign-on or, you know, centralized account management service. But yeah, I mean, I've seen everything. I mean, like I discussed that one, you know, there are certain users I've seen that, you know, submit 13 different types of credentials just trying to get to the message that they really think they need to get to. But typically it seems to be, you know, Active Directory and email credentials.
Okay.
So Jenna, let me ask the guys a question, and Jay, I'm going to direct this one at you.
Okay.
And so when you started your program there at Tallahassee Memorial, I'm sure there was some kind of a cultural or social impact to that. How did you do it, and what has that been, and where are you today with respect to how folks from top to bottom are embracing this program?
Our user populace definitely embraces it. It's worked well in the fact that in some sense it's almost worked too well, where our users have definitely become I guess suspicious is the word. Even legitimate emails that come in that have hyperlinks, they're now very much attuned to really looking at the messages and scrutinizing them, and not just a message comes in, let me click on it and see what it is. They definitely, that the awareness has been raised up to a much higher level than where we started. When we first started, we had a lot of people clicking messages they shouldn't have been clicking. So from that perspective, it's definitely user awareness is raised across the board, and even at the point that some of the C-levels in our organization, they definitely scrutinize those messages very hard now, whereas before I think that they may not have necessarily paid that much attention to phishing type messages.
Okay. Was there anything you did in particular with your users to educate them on the fact that you were going to begin this program, or even educate them on the results of the program along the way, so that they see the benefit of it?
Yes, we actually, our very first campaign that we ran to help get leadership buy-in to where we were going, we took that first statistics in our leadership meeting following that phishing campaign. We actually posted the results up in leadership so that folks could see, here's what the phishing message was. We showed a screenshot of it. Here's how many folks we targeted, and here were the folks that actually clicked on the message. And it wasn't intended to embarrass anybody, but the whole goal was to show that, hey, everybody is susceptible, and folks need to be educated. We do go around and do information security training to our individuals, and we do specifically mention phishing. And after that session's done, those folks that have been trained are the users that are targeted for the next quarter's phishing campaign. And also, we put posters up around the organization as well that explain phishing, how to spot it, how to tell legitimate messages from bad messages. So the education goes a long way.
Okay. Clayton, in your experience, because you've obviously worked with Jay and his organization, but you've worked with several other organizations as well. Are the results that you see working with the different organizations, are they comparable? Is Jay's organization different in some way? What are you seeing there? And then secondly, what do you see as some of the things that contribute to a successful phishing awareness program?
So, Jay's obviously like one of our longer-term clients. So, the effects that he's seen, I think, are more dramatic than some of the ones that we've worked with on a shorter basis. But the ones that we've worked with even on a short-term basis, we're seeing a lot more awareness from the user. It almost becomes a game. Me and the other fishermen within Synergistic are sort of the foil for their attempts to find and point out, or to use Texas parlance, like the bird dog fish. They become really aware of phishing just due to the fact that so many of them fall for it, tell their friends about it, use the same awareness, and then really what drives a lot of that education, to follow the last part of your question, is what we've started utilizing lately is the training message actually shows the fish that was utilized in the assessment. So the user gets the fish in their inbox, they interact with it in whatever way that we determine that will be the trigger for the training event, and then upon that trigger, they're immediately directed to a page which displays that same fish, and it points out to them, like, you should have known this was a bad fish because of this and because of this. And it's usually like we described earlier in those examples. It's it's the poor sender addressing. It's something like a third party that shouldn't be engaged in the task, or the display from addressing doesn't actually match the sender addressing, or the hover links. If they hover their mouse over the link, they'll notice that it directs them to a URL that was not described inside the content of the message. So Jay's, I do believe that Jay's organization is very typical of the kind of response that we get from our clients. It's only atypical in the fact that he's been so long engaged. Now the other org definitely seeing the same kind of effects. I mean, I actually just reviewed a paper today from an organization that this is their third assessment from us. And we're seeing, you know, when we first initiated these types of attacks against them, we were seeing like 22% participation rate on the clicks, and then almost a solid 10% across the board from almost all clients on submission. You know, which is it's really troubling because the idea is if I've enumerated 100 targets from an organization and I hit them all, I'm not going to get 100 responses, but really all I need is a few. And with a 10% participation rate, I mean that's 10 people. And we saw already in the examples of some organizations that have been hit, it only takes a few. You know, it only takes that one privileged user, you know, who has network access or who has some sort of access to a database where all this information is housed to expose them to a lot of risk. So, you know, to sum it all up, Jay is pretty typical in it, and only atypical that he's been with us so long.
Okay. So one other question for both of you, and that is, if an organization, you know, organization wants to set up one of these programs and wants to begin to do this to help raise awareness for their workforce, how much time does it take to do this? In other words, how much time, Jay, do you spend on this each quarter or what have you in terms of working with Clayton to create the messages and do what you need to do to actually run the exercises, et cetera? How much of an investment is this on the part of the organization with respect to time and effort to have this kind of program that proactively increases awareness?
That's actually one of the nice parts about this particular training. It doesn't require a lot of time. I think the largest amount of time is spent trying to come up with the idea for the Phish as far as things that we think will work well within the environment, testing it, making sure that, you know, obviously the whitelists are in place so that the sender domain is able to get through. Outside of that, you know, compiling the user list would be the second most time consuming, and then getting the reports back and getting disseminated in. And even when the Phish is going on, you know, I'll get calls from certain users that have caught the Phish, you know, and raising, you know, questions back to me about what is it, and so it doesn't require a tremendous amount of time, which is from an educational tool is very nice because you can target a large amount of people and it doesn't require an extreme amount of effort.
And from my perspective, you know, like Jay discussed, like the largest amount of time sink is really just getting the template to fall in line with, you know, both of our expectations. You know, generally I prefer to get a template from the client so that I already know exactly what they want. But many times there's, you know, slight alterations that need to be made, and that back and forth generates a little bit of time lag. And really maybe the initial upfront discussion, like I talked, the operational and strategic goals of the phishing assessments over time. Sometimes that takes a little bit, but that's when I say a little bit, I mean an hour. Because we've designed this service really to where Synergistic carries most of the rucksack. I mean, we try to take most of the burden away. Now, once the operation is actually launched, you know, once we get this campaign started, like Jay discussed, there is some back-end tasks, you know, dealing with the help desk and all those. But, you know, it's almost like a fire drill. You know, it's time that's spent, but it's time that's spent worthwhile because the help desk learns to how to remediate a lot of these threats and how to mitigate those factors. You know, how to explain to users or communicate to users that, you know, yes, this was a test, but in the event of a real experience, like this is how you would conduct yourself. You know, those are really the only time lags. Most of the burden I really think falls on our engineers.
Yeah, and Mac, and I would say, I mean, if I added up time perspective, if I figured an hour with Clay to help go through the Phish, go through the testing of it, another hour's worth of time to let my service desk know that this is going out, how to respond to it if users connect in, and then getting approvals from, you know, some of our upper management that this is the Phish we're going to send. I think all told, you know, say target a user populace of 1,000 individuals, I spend roughly 2.5 hours.
Okay.
My time.
Well, super. Well, thank you both, and we're at the top of the hour, so we want to be respectful of people's time. Hopefully, everybody learned some things that they can take away from this webinar and implement in their organization to help increase their awareness and improve their programs. Thank you both, Clayton and Jay, for your expert commentary and sharing your experiences with everybody with respect to how to run one of these programs and how to get benefit out of it. I encourage everyone, if you have questions, please submit those to Jana, and she will get them to either Clayton or Jay or both to get you back an answer. And if you want to speak to either one of those two gentlemen more directly and have a one-on-one peer-to-peer conversation, if you will, on more of the technical aspects of how to do this or whatnot, she can help you with that as well. So again, thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of the week and a great weekend.